Has there been a better night of basketball than what the SEC just served up this year or in a lot of years? How good were Darius Acuff Jr., LeBaron Philon, and Josh Hubbard? Who's hot and who's not as we hit the stretch run of the regular season? Find out next on Scarbo Knows. They were burning down the house last night. Last night being Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. Today being February 19th, 2026. And we are still shaking in awe, somewhat in disbelief at what we witnessed across the Southeastern Conference last night. One of the special nights in SEC basketball history. Indelible individual performances, incredible team comebacks, shakeups in the standings. It had it all. If you love basketball, you had to love last night because it was ready, aim, and fire. And when I say fire, I mean on fire all night long, from Tuscaloosa to College Station to Columbia, Missouri to Starkville, Mississippi. It was a special night of basketball, and we're going to break it all down here on Scarbo Knows. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. This is Scarbo Knows. Thank you for tuning in on the Sidelines.live network. Executive producer Brendan Martin steering the ship as always. Check out all the great shows on the network, and make sure you check out our sponsor, Money Management Services, Birmingham's financial services firm since 1992. We'll hear from my friends, the Rice family, later in the show. But let's dive into it. Let's not tarry. Let's get right to the lead. And it was the game of the year in SEC basketball, in college basketball. Yeah, the Big 12's had a great year. And yeah, Duke's doing great things as usual. And the Big 10 is a lot of fun, especially at the top with Michigan. But no one has put together a night like Alabama and Arkansas did last night in Tuscaloosa, in Coleman Coliseum. The final score in double overtime, Alabama 117, Arkansas 115. And how memorable was that? It was the second most combined points in SEC history. The Tide and the Hogs put up 232 points in 50 minutes of exhilarating basketball. That's the second highest point total in Alabama history, 117. They scored 123, I think it was, against South Florida decades and decades ago. And for Arkansas, this is an incredible stat. I found this from our friends at OptaStats on Twitter. They are the only Division I team in the last 30 years to score 115 or more points, turn the ball over fewer than 10 times, and lose the game. That is hard to believe. And John Calipari in the postgame press conference had a look of disbelief on his face as he looked through the stat sheet and read off all the incredible numbers that the Hogs put up. And somehow, despite leading by 14 in the first half, despite leading by 10 at the half, despite having a double-digit lead in the second half, the Razorbacks found themselves on the short end of their what is that, sixth or seventh straight loss to Alabama. Seems like every one of those games is a great game that goes right down to the wire. That's been a great rivalry ever since Arkansas joined the SEC back in 1992. And this game, in a lot of people's minds, if you've been watching SEC basketball for any length of time, you had to flash back to March 14th, 1992, that first SEC tournament with 12 teams after Arkansas and South Carolina joined the conference. And right here in Birmingham, at the old Birmingham Jefferson Civic Center Coliseum, in the semifinals that year, you had Alabama with Robert Horry, Latrell Sprewell, James Hollywood Robinson, all first-round NBA draft picks. You had Arkansas with Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, Oliver Miller, all first-round NBA draft choices. You had iconic coaches, Wimp Sanderson for Alabama, Nolan Richardson for Arkansas. And that game may be the greatest game in SEC history, certainly given the stakes. Last night, of course, was a regular season game, which is why you have to kind of give the 92 SEC semifinal the nod here. But that game went down to the wire. And with all that NBA talent on the floor, at the very end, Elliott Washington, Alabama's point guard, took a pass from James Hollywood Robinson, still one of the most amazing plays in SEC history because, as Wimp Sanderson used to say, Hollywood wouldn't pass the ball to his mother if she were open. And yet somehow he found Elliott Washington all alone in the corner. He drained a three. Alabama won the game 90-89. And you got that same kind of feel last night. Your heart was pumping. Your brow was sweating. And that was if you were just watching it on television. I was planning to go to the game. I've been sick, unfortunately, for the last week, like a lot of you have. And so it actually turned out better to be able to watch that game and then watch some of the other incredible highlights from the SEC night. But that game was special for so many reasons. And in one reason in particular was Arkansas point guard Darius Acuff Jr. Put on maybe the second greatest individual performance in that building. And they've been playing basketball in that building since 1968. A guy named Pete Maravich once put up 69 points there. Darius Acuff took a run at it. Let's look at the star who was born last night. He really wasn't born last night, but he went to another level. He played all 50 minutes, 40 in regulation, 2 overtimes, 5 minutes each. He scored 49 points. Think about that. 49 points in 50 minutes. That is insane. That's the most points an Arkansas freshman has ever scored, and we just mentioned some of the great talent that's gone through that program. Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, Oliver Miller. You can go on and on and on. Scotty Thurman, Corliss Williamson. That's the most points by any Arkansas player in an SEC game. It's the second most points in Arkansas history in any game. Rodney Clark threw in 51 back in 2009 against Alcorn State. And this is the stat that really blows my mind. Those 49 points that Darius Acuff scored, the most points any player coached by John Calipari has scored in a college basketball game. Let me say that again for emphasis. The most points ever scored in a college basketball game by a player coached by John Calipari. And there are few coaches in the history of college basketball who have coached more talent over time than John Calipari. People are already starting to talk about Darius Acuff in the same breath as Derrick Rose, who Cal coached at Memphis and led them to a national championship game where they came up just short back in 2008. Derrick Rose became an NBA MVP. John Calipari coached John Wall at Kentucky, his first point guard there, who was one and done, of course, and went on to have a very nice NBA career. Derrick Rose was the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft. So was John Wall. John Calipari has coached Marcus Camby at UMass, who led the Minutemen to the Final Four back in 1996. He's coached guys like, who am I leaving out? It's just been a long history of great players that Cal has coached, and none of them scored as many as 49 points in a game. Darius Acuff did it last night. He may have, even in defeat, he may have made himself the front runner for SEC Player of the Year. Thomas Houck is still in that conversation from Florida. LeBaron Philon is in that conversation. We're going to talk about what he did in a moment. But that was an incredible performance. Acuff got wherever he wanted to get. He got off his shot whenever he wanted to get it off. And he did this on a night when Arkansas, first of all, started off with only 7 regulars in its rotation. Didn't have its full lineup. Carter Knox was out. He's a key player for the Razorbacks. He wasn't able to play. So you basically had a 7-man rotation, which makes what Arkansas did all the more amazing. That they jumped on Alabama early, and even when Alabama came back in the second half and took the lead, Arkansas didn't roll over. They didn't run out of gas. They didn't bend over, clutch their shorts, and reach for the oxygen tank. They had plenty in the tank. So it was really an incredible performance. And then in overtime and double overtime, they had 4 guys foul out in all. They had to put 2 guys in the game that had barely played the entire season. And by the way, Jimmy Dykes, I like Jimmy Dykes in general as an analyst, but he said when those 2 players who had barely gotten off the bench for Arkansas all year, they didn't know the plays. I'm sorry. Do they go to practice every day? I think Jimmy got caught up in the emotion of the evening and misspoke there. Certainly they knew the plays. They didn't run them a lot in games because they didn't get much run in games until last night, and they were forced into action. So the fact that Arkansas not only took the game to overtime and took it to double overtime and had a chance to win at the end of overtime, and Darius Acuff missed a shot, and then they missed a putback. And then at the end of overtime, they had a chance to win or tie. Darius Acuff missed another shot. And then Arkansas had a putback dunk and bounced it off the back rim. That's how close that game was to going to a triple overtime. But if you find fault with Darius Acuff because he didn't hit the game-winning shot, I mean, he hit the 3 late in regulation to force overtime. I don't know what more you could ask of any college basketball player, certainly not a freshman point guard, to do what he did. Absolutely amazing. Again, maybe the performance of the year by this incredible freshman class across the country. No one has done what Darius Acuff did last night. And unfortunately for him and Cal and the Razorbacks, came up just short. And they came up just short because Alabama has some special players of its own. They have this guy named LeBaron Philon. As Ron Slay on the SEC Network likes to say, Philon, Philon, Philon. You can't say it enough. You can't say enough good things about him, what he's done in his sophomore season at Alabama. Let's look at his numbers from last night. On any other night, he would have been the star of the show, and he had help. He scored a career-high 35 points in his 41 minutes on the floor. He led the comeback. Alabama, as I said, was down 14 in the first half. In a stretch in the second half, when Alabama really hit the gas pedal, he scored 15 points in 7 minutes. That gave Alabama its first lead of the second half, and then just made clutch play after clutch play. He missed an opportunity to win it in regulation after Acuff had tied it with a 3, but you can't say enough good things about LeBaron Philon last night and all season long. And how about Aiden Sherrill? Alabama's, well, really its lone big man now, since Charles Bediako was ruled ineligible, and a judge refused to give him a preliminary injunction to continue playing after that 5-game cameo appearance. Aiden Sherrill played a career-high 38 minutes, scored a career-high 26 points, and grabbed a career-high 13 rebounds. That is elite. That's the kind of play Alabama's going to need from Sherrill for the rest of the season. If they're going to make a run to finish in the top 4 in the SEC, get that double bye in the SEC tournament, make a run in the SEC tournament, which Alabama's won twice under Nate Oates, the last time in 2023. And if they're going to go deep in the NCAA tournament, which they've made a habit of doing under Oates, they've been to 4 Sweet 16s, 2 Elite 8s the last 2 years, and the Final Four 2 years ago. Philon's going to lead the way, but Aiden Sherrill needs to be Robin to his Batman. He's not going to do what he did last night every night, but he showed what his ceiling might be. And that was special, and Alabama needed every bit of it to put down Arkansas in that game. So after watching that incredible back and forth, and you're sitting there, your heart's pounding, you're considering what you just witnessed. You're trying to put it in historical perspective in your mind. And as I said, I flashed back, as did many people, to that 1992 SEC tournament game between Alabama and Arkansas. So if you care about SEC basketball, and especially if you care about SEC basketball in the state of Alabama, naturally, you're going to flip over to the Auburn-Mississippi State game because there was drama going into that game. Keyshawn Hall had been suspended for the previous game, a risky decision in some ways by first-year head coach Stephen Pearl. How would Hall respond? How would the team respond? Auburn had lost 4 straight games going in to that trip to Starkville. State was going nowhere, but they were dangerous because they have an elite scorer of their own. So you wondered, how was that game turning out? Because you were so zoned in on what was happening in Tuscaloosa. And I changed the channel, and it's the last minute of the first half, and Josh Hubbard has more points than Auburn's entire team. He scored 35 points in the first half, made 9 3-pointers in the first 20 minutes, and it was 46-33 at the half, and you're thinking, oh, well, I guess Keyshawn Hall's back on the floor. He's playing, but it doesn't seem to be working out too well because Auburn's obviously not playing much defense on Josh Hubbard, which has been Auburn's Achilles heel all year long. Its inability to guard the other team's best perimeter scorers. It's happened time and time and time again, and it's especially aggravating to Stephen Pearl because as an assistant coach under his dad, he was the defensive coordinator for the Tigers, and they just have not been able to play defense on the perimeter. So we'll have to hail State, and we have to hail Josh Hubbard. Look at what he did last night as Mississippi State took a big lead into the half. They had a big lead early in the second half. Auburn made a comeback. Auburn took the lead. Auburn was leading by 7 with under 4 minutes to go. And then State completely took over the game, in large part thanks to Josh Hubbard. He finished with a career-high 46 points. That's one shy of the school record. And how long has that stood? How about since 1958? A guy named Bailey Howell scored 47 for the Bulldogs back in 1958, before integration. That's how long ago that was. Hubbard, as I said, outscored Auburn in the first half. He had 35 at the break. Auburn had 33. He finished with a school record 10 3-point shots made. And then in the final minute, Auburn was clinging to a 1-point lead. They found Hubbard alone in the corner, and he drained his 10th 3 of the game. It gave State the lead for good in the final minute. And that pose you see there, that picture, is the pose he struck after hitting that 3-pointer. That, of course, is Auburn's famous Call God sign, which they popularized over the last couple of years, especially last year as they made a run to the Final Four. Their second under Bruce Pearl in his final season as head coach. So Josh Hubbard gave him a little blessing of his own with the game-deciding 3, and then State just continued to dominate the game late. Auburn couldn't make a shot in the lane in the final minute, kept getting their shots blocked in that final minute, and State ends up winning the game 91-85. And by the way, Josh Hubbard went into the game as the SEC's leading scorer. That was his 3rd straight game of 31 or more points. So just an amazing night of SEC basketball. How many, and I have not seen anyone look this up, and this would take some serious research. I haven't had time to do it myself yet. How many times in SEC history have 2 different players for 2 different teams in 2 different games scored 40 or more points, or 46 or more points on the same night? Acuff ended up with 49, Josh Hubbard with 46. Just an amazing night of SEC basketball. In a year that SEC basketball hasn't been as good as it was last year, and last year it was the best conference across the board in the history of the sport. So it would have been hard to duplicate that performance, but don't sleep on the SEC when we get to March. A lot of people are. They're focusing on Michigan. They're focusing on Arizona. They're focusing on Iowa State and Houston and UConn, which lost last night, by the way. They're focusing on teams outside of the SEC as the best teams in the country. If you sleep on the SEC in March, you're doing it wrong, because this league offensively has reached a peak this year. And last night was the peak of the peak with what Acuff and Hubbard did, and Philon scoring 35. So, again, bringing it back home, looking at the state of Alabama, last year was an anomaly in the IBOB history. The IBOB, of course, is the Iron Bowl of basketball. Last year, on February 15th, Auburn was number 1 in the AP poll. Alabama was number 2 in the AP poll. They met in Tuscaloosa. It was the first 1-versus-2 game in SEC history, and Auburn won the game in Tuscaloosa. Those teams ended up in Auburn in the Final Four, Alabama in the Elite Eight. But rarely do you see both of those teams up at the same time. It's more of a teeter-totter ping-pong effect. One's up, one's down. Well, that's certainly the case right now. Alabama has won 5 straight games. Alabama is clearly going to the NCAA tournament. Now it's only a question of seeding. And by the way, on Saturday, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee, which includes Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletics director, they will release their top 16 seeds of the season to date. Michigan undoubtedly will be the number 1 overall seed. I think Alabama, based on that win last night, thanks to that win last night, I think you're going to see them on the 4 line as a 4 seed, as one of the top 16 seeds overall. And they don't release the whole field. They don't do what the football playoff committee does in that foolish television show they do each week, which just makes people scratch their heads. It's inconsistent. There are no good explanations for their decisions by whomever the committee chairman is that week. Basketball gets it right. They give you one sneak preview of what they're thinking in the middle of February, and you don't hear from them again until Selection Sunday. That's the way it ought to be. But while Alabama's won 5 straight games, Auburn has lost 5 in a row. It has lost all the mojo that it displayed, that it earned, that it gained from that incredible win in Gainesville when they beat Florida for the first time in 30 years in that building. And now they are going in the wrong direction. 5 straight losses, again, while Alabama's won 5 in a row. This is not a good place to be when you get in late February. When you start losing games, when you need wins to bolster your NCAA tournament resume. And Auburn's metrics are still really strong because of the strength of schedule, the number 1 schedule in the country that they've played.
Doing good, buddy. How are you?
Brendan, I'm hearing you in the background. Because they played the number 1 strength of schedule in the country, their metrics are strong. We know the wins they have. They've beaten Arkansas. They've beaten Florida. They've beaten St. John's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even their losses have come, I think it was going into last night, and Mississippi State does not fit into this category, but 8 of Auburn's now 12 losses have come against teams that were ranked in the top 19 in Ken Pom. At some point, though, you have to win basketball games. At some point, 14-12 is not going to get it done. And that's where Auburn sits at this point. And you saw it again last night. It started to creep in during this losing streak. It intensified after the decision to bench Keyshawn Hall for the last 12 minutes against Vanderbilt and then suspend him for the Arkansas game. And Arkansas fans, they're grumbling for different reasons. They think the officiating wasn't quite level in Coleman Coliseum last night. But Auburn fans are grumbling about the hire of Stephen Pearl. Now, look, we can revisit that if you like. Was it an ideal situation? No. Did Bruce Pearl engineer the circumstances to ensure that his son would get the job by retiring on the first day of basketball practice? Of course he did. We can, of course, acknowledge that that was not a smart thing to do from the standpoint of where Auburn has been as a basketball program. They've been one of the better programs in the country, one of the better programs in the SEC for a period going back to 2017, 2018. They've won 5 SEC titles in that time, more than anybody else in the league. They have been to 2 Final Fours in that time, more than anybody else in the league. They had put themselves in a position where they could conduct a national search for a head coach. And undoubtedly, they could have hired someone with more head coaching experience than Stephen Pearl. Now, Stephen had positives going for him because he was a part of this incredible era of Auburn basketball. He moved up through the ranks. He became his dad's right-hand man. He graduated to defensive coordinator, associate head coach. He was the designated heir apparent, clearly whom Bruce Pearl wanted to succeed him. But for the good of the program, to do it the right way, Bruce Pearl should not have waited till the first day of basketball practice to step down. John Cohen should not have walked down the hall and given the job to Stephen Pearl with a 5-year contract. They should have inquired, and they should have had the opportunity to inquire at the end of last season to see who might have been interested in the job. I have a hunch there would have been a lot of quality head coaches with far deeper resumes than Stephen Pearl available. But all that is in the past. You can't change the past. So now you have to evaluate Stephen Pearl on the job he's done. And I said it from the start. I think this roster was under-talented. It was certainly weak on the interior. And if Stephen Pearl got this bunch into the NCAA tournament, we would have to give him kudos for a successful first season. But that is certainly in jeopardy now with 5 games left in the regular season. You're not going to fire Stephen Pearl when this season's over, nor should you. That would be an overreaction. That would be a drastic move. Look, if they were sitting here instead of 14-12, if they were 5-21 and they hadn't won an SEC game, that's a different conversation. But they've done enough. We've seen enough positive things from this team this season with a roster that pales in comparison to last year's roster, had no experience playing together, one returning regular in Todd Pettiford, and yet somehow they've put themselves in the conversation to make the NCAA tournament. And until last night, they were really solid. They were solidly in the tournament. It's not the case now. That's a bad loss. It's a bad loss that is going to perhaps haunt them on Selection Sunday. But they have an opportunity to turn things around. They have an opportunity to stop this skid. Now, it won't be easy because guess who rolls into Neville Arena on Saturday? The Kentucky Wildcats. They're licking their wounds. They've lost 2 straight. They couldn't measure up to Florida in Gainesville, and then they took a bad loss against a Georgia team that's probably going to be in the NCAA tournament in Rupp Arena on Tuesday night, and people are howling in the bluegrass about Mark Pope. Not without reason. And I'm not saying Auburn fans are wrong to be questioning Stephen Pearl at this point. You cannot lose to Mississippi State. You cannot let Josh Hubbard, who is the #1 scorer in the SEC going into the game, score 35 points in the first half. Triangle in 2. Whatever you have to do to keep the ball out of his hands or get the ball out of his hands, you cannot let an elite scorer go off like that and essentially put you in such a hole that, yes, you climbed out of the hole and, yes, you took the lead, but who did you let hit the go-ahead 3-pointer from the corner in the final minute? Josh Hubbard. And Pearl did a great job adjusting at halftime of running 2 people at Hubbard in the second half. He'd made 1 basket in the second half before that final 3 in the final minute. But they couldn't sustain it, and they suffer a bad loss. Some of that is coaching. Absolutely, undoubtedly, put that on Stephen Pearl. And let me just say this. He said after the game that this is the worst loss he can remember at Auburn in his experience. Now, he's been there. This is his 12th year as part of the program. Now, I think that was a comment made in the heat of the moment. I have to vehemently disagree with the substance of the comment. You lost 2 years ago after winning the SEC tournament to Yale in the first round of the NCAA tournament. That, I would suggest, is a far worse loss than what happened last night. You lost in 2022 in the second round of the NCAA tournament as a, number 2 seed after winning the SEC regular season championship with Jabari Smith Jr. and Walker Kessler in your lineup. You lost to Miami by 19 in the second round. You didn't even make the second weekend. That, I would suggest, was a worse loss than what happened last night. But when you're talking degrees of bad, it's not a good thing. And that's where Auburn finds itself now. And now it's got to find a way to win some games down the stretch, and it needs to start Saturday with Kentucky. I don't know if Auburn's good enough to beat Kentucky. Well, scratch that. Let me back up. Auburn beat Florida. And if you can beat Florida, you can beat anybody in this league. But you have to do it. And Auburn has got to stop the skid now, or they're going to slide right out of the NCAA tournament. And then the questions about Stephen Pearl's ability to lead that program going forward are only going to get louder and louder and louder. So before we go, let's look at the SEC standings after last night. This is absolutely bonkers. This is bozo world, to use a phrase from UAB coach Andy Kennedy. And by the way, kudos to the Blazers. They won their, 7th or 8th road game in the American Conference last night at Temple. They are undefeated on the road in the American, and they've won only one game at home in the American. That is bonkers. But look at the SEC standings. Florida's pretty much assured itself. It's going to win the regular season championship for the first time since 2014, I might add. It's a rather long drought for the Gators. And then look at the logjam. 3 teams tied for second: Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee. Not only are they all 9-4 in the league, they all have the same 19-7 overall record. We're not going to get into tiebreakers here, but each of those teams has beat the other. Alabama beat Arkansas. Arkansas beat Tennessee. Tennessee beat Alabama. They have one game left in that round. It's not a full round robin. In that little trio, Alabama has to go to Knoxville. We'll see how that turns out. But those 4 teams right now would get the double bye and not open play in Nashville in the SEC tournament until Friday. That is so critical if you want to win that tournament. And then look at this crowd at 8-5. Kentucky, Missouri, Texas, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. 5 teams at 8-5 in the conference. Still trying to get up into that double bye territory for the SEC tournament. That Missouri-Vanderbilt game last night, after the Auburn game, Missouri had put it on Vandy. Vandy made a late comeback, and Vandy took a shot from half court at the buzzer that would have won the game. And if it missed by more than an inch or two from going down, my math is off. That's how close Vandy came to an incredible comeback and joining that second place tie at 9-4. Instead, Missouri got the win. Texas A&M had to come from behind. They were down double digits to Ole Miss, which would have been another bad loss. They had lost 4 in a row, but they stopped the skid. They made a comeback, and they're now up to 8-5. Texas has quietly climbed in the standings. They might be that sneaky good team that could make some noise in Nashville. And Kentucky, I don't know what to tell you about Kentucky. You can't lose to Georgia at home in mid-February and satisfy the Big Blue Nation. Can't lose many games at Rupp Arena ever and satisfy the Big Blue Nation. And then Georgia's next. Those 9 teams on the left of your screen, they're probably in the NCAA tournament, barring some weirdness between now and Selection Sunday. Georgia also probably in. The SEC's looking at 10 or 11 teams in the tournament again. Not as many as their record of 14 last year, but not far off. And then you get to Auburn. Auburn is a bubble team right now. I didn't think that was true before last night, but I think it's absolutely true right now. They're on their longest losing streak in a decade. 10 years ago, under Bruce Pearl and his second year as head coach, they lost 7 in a row, and now they've lost 5 in a row. They've got to stop the bleeding. And I don't know if they can, because Keyshawn Hall came back last night, played very well, scored 29. I think he also had about 10 rebounds, had a double-double. Todd Pettiford had another nice night. Keyshawn Murphy played his tail off, and they still came up short because they're just not good enough defensively. And unlike Alabama, they can't overcome their defensive deficiencies by outscoring people the way Alabama did Arkansas last night. I'm out of breath. I'm out of words. I'm glad we were able to add to our memories of great nights in SEC basketball history last night. There's only more to come as we get down to the end of the regular season, as we find out who's going to the NCAA tournament, and we see who else is going to join this list of who's hot. We know who's not. That would be Auburn. We know who's hot. That's Alabama, Josh Hubbard, and Darius Acuff. Hey, thanks everyone for watching today. This is Scarbo Knows. I am Kevin Scarbinsky. Thank you to Brendan Martin executive producer extraordinaire on the Sidelines.live network. Thank you to you for watching. If you watch us on YouTube, really appreciate it if you'll subscribe to the channel. And thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services, the Rice family. They've been in business since 1992. Good friends of mine. They'll take great care of you. Let's hear from them next. Have a great day, everyone. See you.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.
Thank you.